Good morning. Want to welcome everybody to this week's SafeDefend Facebook Live. Douglas, how are you, sir?
Doing well. It's cold here, but I'm staying warm.
Yeah, it's cold everywhere, I think, right now. I know this week we're going to kind of mix it up a little bit, come at it from maybe a little different perspective. And, there's all kinds of threats. There's all kinds of just unfortunately things out there that can affect our children and our teachers and just everybody involved. But Doug, why don't you tell everybody what we're going to discuss today?
Well, one of the things at SafeDefend that we work with, we don't just do our SafeDefend system. We also do a lot of training and consulting and counseling. And one of the things that seems to have really changed with the advent of social media and the internet is this contact between, say, teachers and students, or between coaches and athletes and things like that. And we've seen some people that have taken advantage of that. And I want to caveat something really quickly about when we talk about sort of inappropriate contact of, say, teachers or coaches. Understand that all the studies clearly show that there is nothing about the job of teachers or being a coach that takes a good person and makes them do bad things. It's that bad people are attracted to these positions because of the access it gives them to children. And one of the things that we have to look for is that there's a very fine line between that person that is a great teacher or a great coach and that is grooming these children for nefarious things. And so it's one of the things that we talk to schools and athletic organizations and let them know you have to be on the lookout for these people, that they are going to mingle with your staff and your team and stuff like that in order to get access to kids. And so what we do is we train them on certain techniques and procedures and ways that they can implement this stuff to make sure that they're documenting this and to make sure that these things don't happen to them.
Now, is there also, because I know, and I'm going to try to frame this in the correct way. Where I live locally, there was just some accusations to a teacher. It was proven through video evidence that what they were being accused of did not happen. And so it was a case of some individuals that were upset with the teacher that made false accusations, right? So does the training also address just how to prevent putting people in those situations to where those kind of things can happen?
That's exactly one of the things that we look at as prevention is the key here. Let me give you just a quick example of something that happened. There was a high school volleyball coach, and he had a senior, and she was on the team for 4 years, but she just was not even starter quality. But she really wanted to start one of these games. And so her mom had said to her, well, why don't you text the coach and just let him know you really want to start this game? And so the girl texts the coach and she says, hey, coach, what can I do? I really want to start my senior year, at least one game. I do anything to get on the starting team. And so the coach responded, I've always liked you. I really want things to work out for you. Why don't you come to my office tomorrow morning before school starts? And I'm sure we can work something out. Right. So it all sounds innocuous, right?
Boy.
So yeah, eyes go up. So then the girl says to her mother, mother says, what did he say? And she reads the text and mom freaks out. Well, very, very fortunately for the coach, he had immediately texted the other coach and said, hey, so-and-so's coming to my office tomorrow morning. She wants to be a starter. We need to figure out what she can do that we can then tell the team this is what you have to do to be a starter your senior year. So they had a long discussion with this other coach while all this stuff was blowing up in the background. So
thank goodness.
Yes, thank goodness or whatever. But one of the things that we sit there and tell these coaches is no matter how quickly this sort of stuff happens, you never respond individually one-on-one with an athlete. You always include a second coach. If there's no second coach, then make sure that their parent is CC'd. Or you at the beginning of the season say, hey, I need a parent coordinator, somebody that I can include on all communications so that there is a third party that is reviewing everything so nothing like that can ever be misconstrued. So that's one of the preventive measures is it seems innocuous just to quickly respond and say, hey, just meet me in my office. We'll figure something out. It was just the wording. It was just the way we speak to each other, whatever.
Yeah.
But it did sound so horrible. The fact that you laughed when I said it just showed that's the way most people reacted. That's the way the mother reacted. She immediately notified the principal and the superintendent. They called him in. They were like, oh, my gosh, that's horrible. And the two other coaches showed up and said, look, here's our phones. And so then they had a meeting immediately with the mother, and it was all cleared up. But it was just one of those things where it very quickly can spiral out of control, like you're talking about, with malicious intent by somebody or just a misconstruing of what was meant by, we'll work something out.
Well, I think most times it's like most things in life. If you slow down long enough and just don't get in a hurry, do the simple things, include somebody else in the conversation, make sure you're copying somebody else. And I think, with text and communication being so easy now, when I was growing up, my parents never would have told me to reach out to the coach and ask them, what do I need to do to be a starter?
Right.
I mean, they just wouldn't, there would have been a conversation that you would have, if the conversation ever occurred, it would have occurred in person at school. There wouldn't have been any communication prior to it, because everybody didn't have a damn phone, and you sure wasn't going to call your coach at home on the weekends back then. So it's just, I think it's teachers and students deal with so much more today because of how easy it is to communicate. And I think it puts people in more potentially compromising situations because of that. The teacher here we're talking about, it all started because somebody wasn't happy, but it also, part of the deal that they said was, well, we saw his phone and he has a bunch of pictures of high school age girls. Well, his kids go to a different school. He has 4 teenage daughters. So the girls they were seeing were pictures of his daughters.
Right.
And so it was all very innocent stuff, but people can get about anywhere they want to if they want to, right?
Right.
Mentally.
And so you bring up another great thing. We talk about prevention, and that is coaches should never take photographs on their own personal phone. You designate either a team photographer and you tell a parent, hey, this is what you do. Or if you're affiliated with the school, then you say, hey, there are so many schools that have these outdated tablets and they have these, phones available, and find a para and say, hey, can you come into my classroom and take photos of the kids? Those are the type of things that we do. Is that, if you're a soccer coach and you have parents on that team, somebody out there has a phone that you can use where you can take photos, because it doesn't have to have Wi-Fi connection and it doesn't have to, have mobile service. It just is used as a camera. And the good thing is you never delete anything off of it. And then you have it so that immediately those upload to an iCloud account, cost $1 a month. And you give,
right.
Hey, here, the name is the Blazers at gmail.com and the password is Blazers123. And so then any parent can access that database of pictures and all that. And then you just have certain rules. One of the ones is there should be no photographer during stretching. That's just not a time when people are in awkward positions, and we don't want photographs of that stuff. So we want action photos, things like that. Another quick example I can tell you is my kids all swim. I'm president of our neighborhood swim team, and I'm on the board. And I remember on our league board, when I first joined the team, I noticed that a lot of these parent volunteers were taking phone calls and stuff like that as there were being a timer behind the blocks. And I, put it up. I said, look, there can't be any phone usage because kids are in a very awkward position when you say, take your mark. And so I said, don't have photography, don't have any cameras back there. There should be no usage. If a parent needs to step out and go use the phone, great. But there's certain areas where you don't use phones. And those are the type of things that coaches need to protect themselves and say, hey, parents, we have rules. No cameras out while kids are stretching. We only want action photos or, sideline photos, things like that. We don't want things that are just kind of awkward and that sort of stuff. And so those are the rules that coaches need to be very proactive when they have their sort of athlete manuals or at school when you have code of conducts, things like that, where you say, violation of these things will result in, hey, if I see a kid who's taking photos during stretching, I'm going to go ask another parent with me to go approach that kid and say, we'd like to see the photos you took, and we're going to delete any photos that we deem to be inappropriate. And that's the type of stuff that we talk to coaches about, is how to be proactive in those situations.
Yeah, we talked about this a few weeks ago. There's so much misunderstanding or lack of understanding, of lack of knowledge of what schools are allowed to do, just like what you just described. When you said, we'd go to them and say, hey, we want to see the pictures you just took, and if there's anything that's inappropriate, we're going to delete it. There's people that would listen to that and go, well, you can't do that. That's his personal phone.
And then you say, you're no longer a member of the team.
Right.
We had team rules.
Right. But you know what I mean? I mean, it's became this thing societally where, and it goes back to these. Listen, I'm all about I love the Constitution. I love the First Amendment. I love all the amendments. Love all of them. Okay, big fan. But you go on YouTube, you see all these people doing First Amendment audits. Where they go out and try to bait law enforcement officers into, making them look bad on camera and all this stuff. And I think it's made the cameras have created so much potential problems, for everybody. I think you've got, and I think that's, quite frankly, it's scary because, part of you says, well, phones can be great tools when there's an emergency, and they can be, but they can
Right.
also be horrible.
And
So
that's
there's just, it's
right.
just, it's
And
crazy.
there's always an interesting thing, and I guess the best analogy I can come up with is the Second Amendment right, and that is your right to carry a gun doesn't supersede my right as a property owner. So if I say no guns on my property, and
Yeah,
my business, my restaurant, whatever, I have a right to just decide what the code of conduct is at my restaurant. So don't think that
correct.
your right to carry supersedes it. Well, the same thing comes with your right to privacy. Your right to privacy doesn't override my ability to not have my image put out there on the internet, my own privacy. And so that's what sometimes people get. And so the only enforcement I have in that situation is to definitely say, hey, you're no longer on the team. One of the things that we always talk to coaches and teachers about when we mention this stuff is setting up very simple rules that are easy to follow. So if I say to teachers, no photographs of students on your phones. If I say to coaches, no photographs of athletes on your phone. That's a very simple rule to follow, right? Like when I pull my phone out and I want to take a photo, oh, I'm not supposed to do it on this phone. But if somebody does break that rule, it makes you question why a rule that is so simple to follow is being violated. And that should raise some red flags. What is it about
Should.
this person that the simplest rules that we put in place, they don't abide by? And so those are the things that we're talking about. What's really unfortunate in these situations, and we've seen this way too much in the sports industry, is you think, well, they're not going to do anything. These are 10 and 11 and 12-year-old girls, or 10, 11, 12-year-old boys. But you understand that these kids they're looking to get into college and they're looking to get this. Some of this stuff is literally grooming them for when they do become adults. And then all of a sudden, like, they become part of their lives for the next 6, 7, 8 years. And now all of a sudden they're 19-year-old girls, 19-year-old boys, and they were trying to get into college. Well, what do you know? I went to, X college and I can get you in. I know the coaches there. Hey, why don't we go to dinner and talk about it? And the reason I'm giving you this example is because this is exactly what they've done, is that they've utilized their relationships that they garnered and fostered 8 years ago, and then they're manipulating those. And what's unfortunate is every year these, if they start this relationship and it goes on long enough, every year they're having a wave of kids that are looking to help get in college. They're getting help getting this or that, or they want to get into a certain thing, or they need a letter of recommendation, whatever it is. And now all of a sudden you have power over them. And that's what we want to make sure that the parents understand is very possible when you have these close relationships. If I don't know about you, I know you were very athletic. I did sports my whole life. I don't know that I kept up with any of those coaches, right? I mean, I might have had one or two. I think my high school coach, I went back to high school like 10 years later and I saw him there. He's getting ready to retire. And I sent him a nice letter and I stopped by his class and said, hey, congratulations on retiring. Yeah. Beyond that, I didn't really have good relationships. And so when these relationships do go out, you also have to think, like, why is it that coach is perpetuating that relationship? Because most of them are so overwhelmed with their athletes, they don't have time for the old ones.
I think I go back to I had very close relationships with my coaches, but it would be like a private keeping a relationship with Patton, right? In the military. I mean, I love them. Even as an old man, I unfortunately just lost my high school football coach a few weeks ago. He passed away suddenly. And he was a very important man in my life. Had a huge impact in my life. Stayed in contact with him throughout my life, as he did with me. But it was never it was a loving, close relationship, but it wasn't a close relationship.
Right.
Because it was 100% grounded on respect, my respect of him. Right.
Right.
And so, and I guess what makes it different too, and maybe this is a generational thing, I don't know this. There wasn't one of my coaches that ever would have dreamed of having a personal relationship with me when I was a student athlete outside of the sport or the classroom. I mean, we wouldn't have been, even if we had cell phones, we wouldn't have been texting each other.
Right.
He wouldn't have had that crap. He was the coach. Why am I texting a 16-year-old person or a 15-year-old? If there's something they need, then their parent needs to contact them. That would be the mentality of the coaches I grew up with. And I'm not pointing fingers at this generation of educator. I'm not. My wife's an educator. And I've had to have this conversation with her where, schools will have those rules that say, hey, you're not allowed to have social media where you're friends with students on social media. to me, that they're just doing the teachers a favor
Right.
by having that rule. I mean, just just take all possibility of any misunderstanding off the table. Just take it off the table.
Right. And
You
just
know,
getting into that point, that is such an easy rule to follow that when a coach or a teacher violates it, you really have to question what it was about their mindset that they thought that that would be okay, because that's where we're talking about.
100%.
And what you've just done is you've explained that huge difference between that fine line between somebody that is a great coach and a great person and somebody that is abusing or using these kids for ulterior motives. And that's that fine line we want to bridge. You know, when we're talking about this sort of stuff, you're always, like you mentioned earlier, that there was an incident that was on tape and it was nefarious and that it was a false allegation. One of the biggest things to do is all of this, you know, this is part of the stuff we talk about. Schools and athletic organizations need to document this stuff, right? Like, so whatever, there needs to be league reps, there needs to be league representatives that say, hey, if you have an incident where something happens, and, you know, there's always things, right? Dad all of a sudden is calling the coach saying, I can't pick up my daughter from work or whatever. And coach has somewhere to be. And he's like, you know what? I'm going to run this child home because it's easier for me instead of waiting for dad for 30 minutes. Well, you need to literally have a league rep's text, call that person, say, hey, I'm going to have to take this kid home. I'll call you as soon as I drop that kid off. I'm literally going here. You know, I'm going to send you the child's home so we know how long it took. So I'm leaving here. It's going to take me 7 minutes to get there. I should be getting a text with you within 20 minutes that this child has been dropped off and I'm by myself, you know, solo. Yep. Those are the type of things that league reps need to step up. But one of the things that we talk about is when you do document all this, emailing this situations is fine as long as there's a league rep that can keep, you know, you have a copy of the email, they have it, that way you reported it. But the other thing too is if there is an incident that has to be investigated and we have to look at the rules, it's very important that you find some outsider, whether you just hire a police officer or contact SafeDefend and say, hey, here's what we're going to do. We'd like to just pay a quick consulting fee. Can you review the incident, our policy, and then the actions we took to rectify it and make sure that we're okay? Because if anything comes down the line, you know, from litigation or something like that, having somebody like me step into court and say, look, this is what their policy said, this is what their incident happened, and they follow their policy with the consequences and everything that happened there. So there is no violation here. There's nothing that was untoward and all this. You have somebody like me come in and testify in court and say, hey, this is not what you're making out to be. But even before you get that, you know, you get these affidavits where if litigation does come about, and I sit there and I'm filling out an affidavit saying they did everything by the book and there was nothing wrong here, that really kind of just protects the organization and protects the schools and things like that. And those are the things that we just aren't doing that we need to do. Is it's that ounce of prevention for a pound of cure.
Yeah, and I think there's you know, again, it's like most things in life. If you slow down and just think, right, and are just situationally aware of what's going on. And I'm saying this to a parent, a student, or a teacher, right? I mean, you know, if you're a teacher, don't put yourself in those situations where things can be misconstrued. If you're a student, be aware of where you're at. If something doesn't feel right, it probably isn't. I mean, you gotta learn to trust your instincts, right? And even if it ended up being something that your instincts were wrong, that's okay. That's okay. Just keep yourself out of that situation. And if you're a parent, this is something I never understood. Never understood this. Our kids would come and say, hey, Johnny, I got a friend at school, his name's Johnny. He wants to spend the night. Is that okay? And I'd say, well, yeah, if his parents are okay with that, that's fine with me. And I would expect that the parents would want to meet me. Rarely happened.
Well, I'll tell you the way.
If my son wanted to go spend, and one of our kids wanted to go spend the night, me and those parents were meeting. The adults were having a meeting. We were going to know what was going on before we sent our children over there. I'm not.
Yeah, no doubt. I would tell you, you know, having gone through this myself, I always made sure the first thing I said, well, I don't have their contact information, so I need both their cell numbers. And then I would put them both on a group text and I said, hey, we're so happy to have, you know, Roey come spend the night here. What I need to know, does he have any food allergies? Are there any restrictions I need to know about? Are there any medicines that he takes? Are there any issues that I should be concerned about? And so I'm basically doing this, hey, I would just want to be aware, whatever. And then I'd also say, hey, just so you know, here's my address. I'd give it to him. And by the way, you know, contact me anytime. And then the other thing that I would tell you to do is that if you have somebody spend the night, I don't know if you do it, but I put my phone on do not disturb at 10 o'clock at night till 6 in the morning. But one of the things you do is you add those parents to that phone contact, and then you literally put in emergency bypass. So if they call you at midnight because they have an issue or something like that, it's going to ring through as opposed to that. And I have a kid who's he's a diabetic, and his parents are always concerned. And I literally, it was funny because they're like, well, we're just worried about him. I go, I'll tell you what, I'll put you on, give me your phone number. I already have their phone number. I'm like, I'll put you on emergency bypass. You can contact me anytime, but I'll make sure that if there's any issues, whatever. And they just laugh. They're like, we never even thought of that. And so that's one of those things you can do is you can protect yourself. Yeah.
Yeah. And it is the simple things, right? It's the little things. It's if you're a teacher or a coach, you said it earlier, don't have one-on-one meetings, have another coach, assistant coach, and athletic director in the room when you're having those conversations. But and it's the same for kiddos. Kiddos shouldn't, in my opinion, this is just me, you as a child, we need to teach our kids to protect themselves, meaning they need to know what situations look like. And it's tough if you're a 13-year-old, 14-year-old, 15-year-old young person and the coach says, I want to meet you at 2 o'clock. I get it. It's tough to say, well, who else is going to be in the room? That's awkward. I get that,
Right.
and that's as a child, for a child to ask that question. But I think that's where good communication with parents empowers those kids to know that, if there's a meeting that, how do I approach this in the best way possible? Hopefully the coaches have addressed that and they have a policy. And I think in most schools today, that's been talked enough about that it's at least, I think more schools do that than that don't, probably, in today's world. Would
Right.
you agree with that?
I would.
I mean,
One of the things
yeah,
that's interesting is if you can't have two coaches, that's what the captain's for, right? So you all of a sudden, if you have
yeah,
to talk one of the kids down, then you con the captain, but it should never be
yeah,
a one-on-one. And then you have to, as a coach, pull that captain aside and say, hey, part of your thing is discretion, and not, if I have a meeting with a person about their performance, I better not be hearing rumors that other kids know about that, because you're in the room to protect everybody and to know what's going on. So that's the thing.
yeah.
One of the things that's interesting is you talk about schools, and I would tell you too many schools have policies that are outdated and that don't address some of these issues that need to be there. And so that is a huge thing. You should always have, every one of your policies should have the date that it was, adopted or, accepted. And then every year there
Right.
should be a review, and that policy, even if you don't change a single word, you still put at the top of the page, reviewed, January of 2022. And then that way we know that this is an up-to-date policy that's there. The last thing you need is a 2010 policy when we're dealing 11 years later with things like, the whole world has changed in
Right.
the last 11 years. And so that, and athletic organizations, these private teams and all that, every one of them needs to have policies on this sort of stuff. This is, parent contact, or parent conduct, athlete conduct, coach conduct, social media usage, photography policies. And this is all stuff that can, this is the type of stuff that we do as SafeDefend, is help draft these things, and we help them tweak their policies to make sure that. But the other thing too is we just review them. We get paid just to have somebody send us all their policies, and then I say, hey, just so you know, there was a court case that dealt with this out in California, and so the best practice today is that this is how you handle a situation like that. So let's change paragraph 3 to reflect this. That's the type of stuff we do, and then we can just send it right back to you, and then all of a sudden you just approve it. And the biggest thing is to make sure you implement and you follow your policy. You cannot take favorites. If you have a coach that literally runs a kid home because they only lived a mile from there because they wanted to get home to their own kids, and they didn't notify anybody that they were doing that, then there needs to be a letter of reprimand. Just, it's all it is, just a simple letter of reprimand that's emailed. Please follow this policy. You were in violation. Continued abuse will result in further discipline.
And again, that's there to protect everybody involved. I mean,
Right.
intentions are good. 9% of the time, intentions are good, right? I mean,
Right.
the mass majority of our teachers are good people that are there to educate kids and keep them safe and protected. But we all know, unfortunately, in society, there are those folks that have bad intentions. And so I think having those good, simple policies like you're discussing, having good communication between the student athletes or the students and the parents and the teachers and everybody involved is the key to a good, safe environment. Doug, I appreciate it. It's a good topic. It's a interesting topic. It's not something that I think, unfortunately, people think about as much as they probably should. And hopefully, if there's people out there that have questions, they can get a hold of you guys and get some good answers.
Yeah, and I just want to reiterate, we are not saying that coaches and teachers are bad people. What we're trying to say is
Right,
sometimes we cut
right.
corners that can be misconstrued. But the other thing too is that there is that wolf in sheep's clothing that can show up because it does give them access
Yep.
to kids, and it's just being aware of what those techniques are to groom these kids to sort of set up relationships that allow that perpetrator to sort of compromise the athletes, and we just don't want that. We have to do that, and again, we're not accusing anybody, but you have to understand there's people that are going to try and take advantage of these situations. We continually see this. It's just one of those things to be aware of it.
You got to be safe. We're talking about people's lives. You got to be safe. Doug, I know that you're rooting hard for the Chiefs this weekend. You got a prediction for us before we get off here?
Chiefs by 17.
17. Whoa,
That's
going
going to blow
big.
up. They're no longer playing around. None of this 34-31 losing by field goal anymore.
That's awesome. Well, hey, Doug, we appreciate you. Appreciate your expertise and your willingness to share, and we'll talk to you very soon.
Thanks so much. Have a great weekend.
Thanks, Doug. Take care.